So hello, my name is Matt Bowker and I manage Rhodes Scholars virtual lecture series. And it's my pleasure to host today's virtual lecture. So these lectures are free and available to Rhodes Scholar participants as well as anyone who loves to learn. This virtual program is critical to helping us pursue our not-for-profit mission of making learning accessible to as many lifelong learners as we can, even those who do not have the physical ability or financial means to travel, or leave their homes to join us on the program. Ultimately, this series would not be possible without the support of participants just like you who have funded this project through generous donations. So please consider making a donation to Not-for-Profit Rhodes Scholar so that we can continue to provide educational experiences both in the virtual classroom and beyond. So please visit rhodesscholar.org/give to show your support with a monetary donation. Every dollar helps. So Rhodes Scholar is headquartered in Boston, but we have offices and staff around the world. And today, you'll be hearing from Elaine Ruffolo. Elaine is a Renaissance art historian with a special interest in 15th century patronage. She has lectured for Syracuse and Stanford universities in Florence and designed academic travel programs for numerous organizations and colleges. And during the recent lockdown, she has founded Art History Encounters, an online classes bringing Italian art and culture for those at home. So please visit elaineruffolo.com to find out more about her art classes. She's also been lecturing on Rhodes Scholar programs since 1989, and she is a featured expert on program 2221, Italian Extravaganza, Rome, Florence, and Venice at their finest. So before we begin, a few quick notes. Elaine will present for approximately 30 minutes, after which we will host a 10 to 15-minute question and answer session. Now, during the session, you can submit questions using the question and answer icon located at the bottom of your screen. And then afterwards, I will read a few questions live for Elaine to respond. Should you encounter any technical issues, don't worry. We'll be adding a recording of the lecture to our online virtual lecture library. And finally, at the end of the Q&A, you'll be prompted to take a very short survey. And just like on any Rhodes Scholar program, we ask that you take a few moments to fill it out. It will help us grow and improve our virtual lecture series. So let's have a warm virtual welcome for Elaine.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Grazie mille. Lovely to be invited to give this presentation. A very warm thank you to Matthew to do the presentation on the young Michelangelo for Rhodes Scholar. I'm coming to you from Florence, Italy, where I've been living since 1989, teaching and living and really understanding that I've got the best job in the whole world, teaching Renaissance art in the very city where it was born. And of course, one of the most important artists of the Renaissance is Michelangelo. And because Michelangelo lived so long, he was born in 1475. He dies in 1564, 89 years, which is 3 times the life expectancy of a man in the Renaissance. I thought it would be important for us to take a look at Michelangelo in 2 parts. So this evening for me, I think daytime for most of you, we'll be taking a look at the young Michelangelo and understanding where he comes from, what the economy of the city of Florence is like, and how we get up to the point where Michelangelo meets his great nemesis and also inspiration, Pope Julius II. So let's jump right into the material. As I said, Michelangelo born 1475 and he dies in 1564, living a most interesting life in most interesting times. And we know quite a bit about Michelangelo's life through a primary resource, meaning someone who was writing about Michelangelo during his lifetime and was also a friend of Michelangelo's, which sometimes means we've got to take them with a grain of salt, because Giorgio Vasari will always try to put Michelangelo in the very best light possible. Vasari, 1511 to 1574, a contemporary of Michelangelo's. Most of you will recognize that name because Vasari wrote something called The Lives of the Artists. He was also the court artist to Duke Cosimo de' Medici. And he tells us the early life of Michelangelo. he tells us that Michelangelo was born not in Florence, but in a little village beyond Florence in an area called the Casentino, which is going to be northwest of Florence, up in the hills, and in a little town called Caprese, still under the control of Florence, but out in the hinterland. And Michelangelo was born to a man who was a notary named Buonarroti. And unfortunately, his mother died when Michelangelo was only 6 years old. So his father, who considered himself high class, he also considered himself minor nobility. Michelangelo liked to think that he was descending from the counts of the Canossa family. Is going to move Michelangelo and his brothers. Michelangelo was one of 5, the first brother of 5, to the city of Florence. And of course, where else would one go but Florence to really make your bones during this period of the late 15th century? There's no better time, I think, to be alive than in Florence in the end of the 15th century, especially if you are a man, and especially if you are a notary like Messer Buonarroti was. Now, here is the city of Florence during this period, which I find absolutely fascinating. This is the period of what I like to call the golden age of Florence. So let's read this together. Lean in close with me, and you'll be able to see some of the details of the city of Florence. You'll notice, for example, that Florence is built along the Arno River, A-R-N-O. And more or less, it's right in the center of, runs almost to the very center of town. Off in the distance, in this area to the north and to the east, the hills where Michelangelo came from, you can see that it was surrounded by city walls. Those city walls date 1297. Look at all the buildings, including Town Hall, the Duomo, towers, palaces, Santa Maria Novella. Come down with me and notice that these series of bridges that you can see, by the way, today is the anniversary of the bombing of the bridges in Florence in World War II, just as an aside. And over here on the right-hand side, that's known as the Oltrarno, beyond the Arno River, incorporates both sides of the river into the city. Okay, so your question should be right away, what was making Florence so wealthy? And the answer is, at this early period, going back all the way to the 14th century, Florence was really a city of textile merchants, which created an incredible amount of wealth, and then after the textile merchants will come lawyers and apothecaries, shoemakers, silk merchants. Everybody's making money in Florence, including bankers. And that, my friends, is where the Medici come in. Now, I know my colleague Rocky Ruggiero came in a few weeks ago to talk to you about the Medici, and I will remind you that the Medici were the movers and shakers of Florence in the 15th century. They come from an area outside of Florence called the Mugello. Don't really know very much about them in the early days, but we do know that it was under this man, Cosimo, known as Cosimo il Vecchio, that the Medici will come to their fruition. He was a banker, and he came up with the bright idea of branch offices, one of the key reasons why the Medici were so successful. Take a look behind Cosimo. You can see, for example, there's a symbol back there of branches. And there on a scroll that wraps around one of the branches, it says, cut off one new shoot and a new shoot will bloom. These are the Medici coming in, making money in Florence through banking. But ask yourselves, how does one make money banking? Charging money for interest, loaning it out for interest. And at some points, the Medici were charging upwards towards 27% interest. Friends, that's called usury. So what the Medici have to do is give it back by paying for good works. The upshot is that Florence becomes incredibly wealthy and flooded with the patronage of these wealthy merchants, including the Medici. The picture I'm showing you here is actually the Medici who are all dressed up like magi. This is Cosimo. And he's right. He's dressed up like one of the three magi coming in to greet the Christ child. He's riding a donkey, so he doesn't incite jealousy amongst his peers. Gee, who else rides a donkey coming into town? Or take a look at his son, Piero the Gouty, who suffered from gout, spent most of his time in bed. Here's one of the first people of color. You can see on the left, a Moor. Here, movers and shakers of Florence and Europe. And here where my cursor is, this is going to be Lorenzo the Magnificent, his little brother Giuliano. And these are the Medici who are painting this golden age of Florence, which Michelangelo is growing up in. So what else is going to inspire Michelangelo? Wow, look at these images. These, I'm sure many of you have studied Renaissance art history. Perhaps some of you have studied with me on different Rhodes Scholar programs. But I will remind you that Michelangelo is walking through the streets of Florence, and he could have easily looked up and seen Donatello's St. George, a large marble figure of a young man scanning the horizon for the enemy. Sounds familiar to me. Or he could have, and we're sure, he was sketching as a young artist, looking at Masaccio over at the Brancacci Chapel. Masaccio showing us for the first time chiaroscuro, lights and darks. This is his very famous image of the expulsion of Adam and Eve. Michelangelo's contemporary will be Andrea del Verrocchio. And this is the world that Michelangelo is training in as a young man. Let me remind you, one of the most popular artists at the time that Michelangelo is a young boy is Sandro Botticelli. Now, this is one of the most famous paintings in the world, and I'll remind you that that is not the Virgin Mary, and she doesn't have any clothes on. Mythology has become all the rage in Florence in these days in the mid-15th century. Okay, so Botticelli is going to inspire Michelangelo, and of course, we've got to mention the great Leonardo da Vinci, who is about 20 years older than Michelangelo, but certainly Michelangelo is living in his shadow, especially as a young man, and has got to try to live up and perhaps even overcome the myth of the great Leonardo da Vinci. So that's the world that Michelangelo is involved in. Then Michelangelo, remember, now he's in Florence as a kid, he's growing up. And at the age of 10, Michelangelo is invited to work here at the Church of Santa Maria Novella. It's right near the train station. It's the big Dominican church in Florence. And he's invited to work in the high chapel, working with the hottest fresco painter in Florence, Domenico Ghirlandaio. So Domenico Ghirlandaio and Botticelli are contemporaries. Maybe you've never heard of him, but at the time, he was the fresco painter. And Michelangelo was hired by Ghirlandaio to learn the art of fresco painting. Now remember what I told you earlier, Michelangelo's father was a notary. The last thing he wanted his son to do was get his hands dirty. But the twist is that Ghirlandaio pays Michelangelo to work for him, telling us that he is already some kind of a prodigy. Here, have a look. Now, this is one of the famous frescoes there. And I'm not saying Michelangelo painted this, but this is where Michelangelo would have learned the art of fresco painting, mixing up intonaco, pigments. And that's going to be important when Michelangelo's got to paint that old ceiling, you might remember, down in Rome, which we're going to get to with part 2 of my presentation. This is also how Michelangelo gets the attention of the Medici family, because the Tornabuoni family that commissioned this work, Giovanni Tornabuoni's sister was the mother of Lorenzo the Magnificent. And that's how Michelangelo comes to the attention of Lorenzo il Magnifico. He's a Medici. He's going to be Cosimo's grandson. And he is the unofficial Prince of Florence. Here he is, shown, surrounded by architects, artists. In this posthumous painting by Giovanni di San Giovanni, he's pointing at Michelangelo to come in and present him a marble faun. And he became the darling, Michelangelo, of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Can you imagine? He was invited at the age of 16 to come and live here. right in downtown Florence. This is called the Palazzo Medici. Now it's known as the Palazzo Medici. And Michelangelo is growing up as a teenager right in this palace, sitting to the right-hand side of Lorenzo the Magnificent. I mean, this is like going to Harvard. This is the place. And as he was walking through this courtyard, he would have gone through with the children of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who are going to grow up to become popes. He's going to walk through the humanists. He's going to look at Donatello's bronze David, which will inspire Michelangelo when he's got to do his own David. And it's here that we have Michelangelo's first very, very early works of art, when he's just a young artist getting started. On your left-hand side, you can see what's known as the Madonna of the Stairs, 1492, and the Battle Relief, 1492. They're both at the Casa Buonarroti. And I wanted you to see these because they're quite young on Michelangelo's style. You can see, for example, here, the Madonna and Child, very flat, almost like a relief, reminding me of a Stele figure. Or coming over this side, Michelangelo's Battle Relief, very heavy, very deeply carved. Two different styles, as if they were done by two different artists. But remember, Michelangelo's just a teenager here. He's trying things out and trying to make it all work out. Maybe looking, for example, at a high relief, a Roman sarcophagus relief, or perhaps even at Donatello at this point. This is a famous Donatello that is at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and you can all see the similarities. So I'd like you to be thinking about those early works as Michelangelo getting his feet wet and training as a young artist. All right. Then, basically, Lorenzo the Magnificent writes Michelangelo a letter of recommendation just before he dies in 1492. Lorenzo the Magnificent dies, and Michelangelo is going to make his way off to Rome. By the way, 1492 is an important year, to say the least. I'll get back to that. Now Michelangelo goes to Rome, and he's going to work in Rome for his first big commission, which is called the Bacchus. The Bacchus was supposed to stand in a collection of a guy named Cardinal Riario, and be part of what was supposed to look as if it was a piece from classical antiquity. So in some ways, Michelangelo's sort of fooling us, trying to make us believe that this Bacchus is from the 1st century BC. But of course it's not. It's a monumental piece, the first professional piece by Michelangelo. And the fact that it's a Bacchus, I think, is quite interesting because it's a mythological story. Remember, I told you earlier, mythology is all the rage, like Botticelli was giving us. Remember, 1453, Constantinople falls to the Turks. And what happens? The Greeks come into Florence and Venice, and they bring with them new ideas, stories of classical antiquity, and soon classical vocabulary becomes all the rage, as we see in this early piece by Michelangelo, the Bacchus. This also is going to bring Michelangelo to Rome, where he's able to make his calling card. And this is, of course, Michelangelo's Pietà, perhaps the most beautiful statue in Western history. Michelangelo's 21 years old, and he was commissioned by a friend of the patron of the Bacchus. His name was, he was a cardinal, a French cardinal. I wanted to bring up the French idea because, in fact, northern themes of the Pietà is an apocryphal moment that Mary and Christ come together for one last time. Mary is 50, Christ is 33. It's an awkward moment because of the size differentiation of the figures, as you can see here in this northern work, which emphasizes, of course, the pathos, the grief of the figure. And Michelangelo takes that theme and gives us perfection. All right, read this with me. What you can see immediately is Mary presenting Christ to us. But we don't notice that Mary is a small woman and Christ is 33 years old, because Michelangelo makes Mary enormous. If she stood up, she'd be about 8 feet tall. He pulls this together by giving us, follow the cursor with me, this strong pyramidal form up to the top of Mary with this superimposed oval on top, bringing those two figures together beautifully. Mary is a closing figure. Christ is an opening figure. Let's get up close. Look at this. The careful delineation of each passage of this sculpture. Notice the way Michelangelo carefully carves in the wound of Christ, how Mary softly holds her son with this silken material between her hands and his body. Look at the vein coming out of Christ's muscular arm. And then across the bottom, you can see he's just taken his last breath, and how Michelangelo's careful to juxtapose the curve and the turn of the drapery with the curve and the turn of his wrist, with the curve and the turn of that palm of the Virgin Mary, repeating these passages, giving us this visual delight, even when we're looking at, of course, the dead Christ. Mary, beautiful figure, looking more like a Botticelli than Michelangelo. And Michelangelo was actually criticized for this because people said that she certainly doesn't look like she's 16 years old. And Michelangelo quipped, "Virgins don't age," which sounds like a typical Michelangelo thing to say. Here, if you look carefully, see the writing on her sash. The writing there says, "Michelangelo Buonarroti, Florentine, made this." Friends, that's the first and only signed work of art by Michelangelo, and that's why we look at it as his calling card. Beautiful images of the Pietà. So now Michelangelo's hit it big in Rome. Meanwhile, back in Florence, what's going on? I've hit 1492. Columbus sails the ocean blue. The Jews are expelled from Spain. Spanish Inquisition, and the French king, Charles VIII, marches into the Italian city-states. Lorenzo the Magnificent dies, and his son, Piero, takes over, better known as Piero the Unfortunate. He didn't know what he was doing. He was not the man his father was whatsoever, and he panicked and tried to cut a deal with the French king, giving away precious ports, precious land to the French, and the Florentines kicked him out of the city in 1494. Who takes over? Girolamo Savonarola, fanatical Dominican monk who's going to preach against the Medici. He preached against Florence. He said Florence is Sin City, the Las Vegas of Tuscany. He started something called the Bonfire of the Vanities. I'm sure you've all heard of that. Bonfires were set. People were supposed to throw in anything that was considered sinful: books, playing cards, dice, wigs, furs, but mostly pagan paintings, perhaps even Botticelli through some of his works of art in the famous Bonfire of the Vanities. Well, Savonarola goes too far, like so many fanatics do. He called the Pope the Antichrist, which, friends, is just plain dumb, because the Pope at the time was a Borgia Pope. And you can imagine how irate Borgia became. Alexander VI, Borgia, he's going to bring to heel Savonarola and the Florentines. How does he do this? He excommunicates the entire city. And the Florentines have to give up Savonarola. They bring him to trial right here in front of Town Hall. They find him guilty of heresy. Here he is being tried. Here he is with two of his followers being brought to punishment. He is hanged and burned in Piazza della Signoria, 1498. Now, I'm telling you that for a specific reason. After the death of Savonarola, the Medici had been already kicked out of the city. And Florence is at this crossroads. She was once under the financial power of the Medici. Then she's a theocracy under Savonarola. And after the death of Savonarola, she decides that she's going to go back to her original republic, the Republic of Florence. And for the Republic of Florence, she wanted a new symbol. They called to the talented young Michelangelo, who's he's only 24 years old, to carve a statue that will best reflect the new Republic of Florence. And that's where the David comes in. So I would say, without a doubt, the most famous statue in Western history, Michelangelo's David, all about Florence at the change to a republic once again at the opening of the 16th century. And it's an important work, to say the least. So Michelangelo, let's get into it. Michelangelo was carefully just finished the Pietà. It made him very well known. He was at the height of his game. And the Republic of Florence asked him to make the David. Michelangelo received a giant piece of marble that was already in Florence, that an earlier artist named Agostino di Duccio had tried to carve a figure out of, and he kind of botched it up. And then the block of marble had been lying around in the cathedral workyard for 50 years. They said it was cooked. And Michelangelo managed to get this thing up and start to carve. And he said, I got this. Now, the placement for the original David was supposed to go right here, right where my cursor is. That's up on one of the buttresses of Florence Cathedral. See this yellow building right there? That's where the museum of the cathedral is today, and that's where Michelangelo carved the David. So the idea was that he could just bring it out. They're going to put it up on one of these platforms here, and now I don't know how the heck they thought they were going to get it up there. The David weighs 6 tons. So even before, by 1502, they decided to change the location for the David. And instead, I mean, look at the size of this thing. He's 17.5 feet tall and he weighs 6 tons. They got a committee together and decided to place the David here in front of Town Hall. You know who's on the committee? Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, Luca Signorelli. And come up close and you can see where the copy stands today. The David in front of Town Hall is very much a political statement, much more than a religious statement. He's a protector figure. Now, he stood in front of Town Hall until 1873, and that's when, well, here's a copy. I like the copy to look at just for a second, because you can see that the light is hitting and going across his face, making him look menacing. He's looking left. He's looking towards Rome. Where did the Medici go when they were kicked out of the city? They went to Rome. It's almost a signal. Now here's the original, which is today in the Academia. All right, now look at the image, and you'll all notice that the hands of David and the head of David are very large. Now, keeping in mind that this thing was supposed to have gone 30 feet off the ground on that platform I showed you, Michelangelo might have been enlarging the hands and the head so that it would make sense visually from down at street level. But because it was placed in front of Town Hall, now the hands look a little bit outsized. All right, who is this David guy? So David comes from the Old Testament story, book of Samuel. He's supposed to be a skinny adolescent kid who's going to go out and help King Saul fight against the Philistines. King Saul says, here, David, take my armor. Of course, he's too skinny for the armor, sets it aside, and he goes out and he's able to slay Goliath using a rock and a sling and trust in God. One of the greatest stories of the Old Testament, the little guy over the big guy, trust in God, anti-tyranny. See, the Florentines like to think of themselves as an upstart David, but as you can all see, that's no skinny adolescent kid. Michelangelo has made David grow up. He's in a perfect condition. He's the ideal male form, standing in a beautiful contrapposto. See how his one right leg holds up the weight of the body. The left leg is relaxed. The torso is divided into 3. He looks left, and look at the face. Menacing. Michelangelo has deeply drilled those eyeballs so that when the sunshine would hit it, you would get this sparkling effect. In his left hand, he holds the sling, and in his right hand, he holds the end of the sling. And the detail here of Michelangelo's The Hand of David, shows us that Michelangelo must have been doing human dissection of cadavers by this point. He's understood how the body works from the bones to the muscles. Look at the veins. Don't they look as if they've been filled with blood? Now, believe it or not, Michelangelo, when he did this, Medici supporters shot stones at this thing because it was an anti-Medici symbol. And that's why, if you all look really carefully, right where my cursor is, the David has got a break there in his finger from stones being shot at him. So this takes us right to the High Renaissance with the David. So why is David important? Because of the political moment going on in Florence, how this has a political spin, the very beauty of the David in contrapposto, and it's looking back to classical antiquity. Remember, like the Bacchus I showed you, Michelangelo's pulling out everything that he learned from a young adolescent, and here is a young man, he's giving us this idealized form. It's also referring back to classical antiquity, but most importantly, it is the size and the can-do that Michelangelo was able to pull off with this amazing image of the David. Now, Michelangelo, just taking him just before he goes to Rome, now he's hot stuff. Everybody wants a commission from Michelangelo, including these two characters, two silk merchant. This is Angelo Doni and his wife, Magdalena Strozzi. And they commissioned Michelangelo to make a painting, the painting of the Doni Tondo. And here it is. This is the only painting we have in Florence by Michelangelo. It's almost the only painting that Michelangelo does in his entire career, besides that old ceiling you might remember, because Michelangelo is riding this wave of fame after the Pietà and the David. He's getting commission after commission. And I wanted you to see this because it's again, one of the very few paintings that Michelangelo does. Yes, I know it's a painting, but doesn't it look like sculpture? Wow. This is contemporary to Leonardo's Mona Lisa, which is soft and veiled, sfumato. Michelangelo's painting looks stony, as if they're made of porcelain. Look at the composition based on a figure 8, falling around from the head of Joseph, who passes the Christ tile to the Virgin Mary, all around and back up again, following the frame, the beautiful frame, which we think Michelangelo actually designed. Also, look at the color. The color's exaggerated. These very beautiful crisp blues, icy blues, with pinks against orange. The muscularity of the Virgin Mary. She does some major weightlifting. Check out those, biceps. And here's little John the Baptist looking up adoringly. And in the background, I can see a whole bunch of nude men. Everyone looking like David. Even the Virgin Mary's face reminds us, of course, of the David. So here's Michelangelo really working in this style, which is astonishing and brings him great fame in Florence with silk merchants, bankers, Michelangelo's the government of Florence. And that's how Michelangelo comes to the next great patron in his life, coming to Rome, where he's called by the big guy himself, Julius II. And for the information on Julius II and the second half of Michelangelo's career, which I like to call the genius of Michelangelo, when Julius II tells Michelangelo, I've been waiting for you my whole life, get to Rome. And Michelangelo will begin working for Julius, including the Julius II tomb and, of course, the Sistine Chapel. Thank you all very much. And I think I can take questions now. Matt, we're exactly at 30 minutes, so.
Well done, Elaine, and what a cliffhanger to leave us on.
Yes.
So just a reminder for those of you who would like to submit a question, you can do so using the question and answer icon at the bottom of the screen. So let's go to our first question from Linda. Did Michelangelo ever marry?
No, Michelangelo never married. We think Michelangelo was homosexual. He had one great love in his life, a man named Tommaso Cavaliere. No children, and yeah.
Okay. We have a question about anatomy and in general. So you mentioned that Michelangelo studied cadavers. Was this a common practice
Yeah, very good question.
for
Sorry.
sculptors?
So it's really around the time of Andrea del Verrocchio. So in the 1470s, that they started to do dissection of cadavers. But Michelangelo, Andrea del Verrocchio, and Leonardo da Vinci were some of the very first, Paolo as well. Michelangelo went over to the Church of Santo Spirito, and they were Augustinian, very open-minded, and they allowed Michelangelo to go in and dissect the paupers or the thieves that were buried there. And in thanks for that, Michelangelo carved a beautiful wooden crucifix and he gave it to the Augustinians as a gift. So highly, highly unusual. And you can see the knowledge that he had reflected in his artworks.
With regards to David, Anita asks, how long did it take for Michelangelo to carve David?
Good question. So remember, Anita, he received the block of marble was already in Florence. He begins it in 1501 and he finishes it in 1504. Exactly. He's only 26 years old when he finished it. So it's, amazing.
I know. Did Michelangelo ever meet Da Vinci?
Yes, good question. Michelangelo and Leonardo knew each other. They didn't like each other. I think more or less Leonardo didn't really think much about Michelangelo, kind of thought of him as a kid. But they insulted each other on the streets. Michelangelo said to Leonardo, "You paint like a girl," which I guess was insulting. They had a commission together side by side in 1498, right when Savonarola was hanged and burned. The government of Florence gave the two great artists a commission to do two frescoes next to each other, the Battle of Anghiari and the Battle of Cascina, neither of which exist any longer, but they realized that the competition between these two figures, two characters, was important. So absolutely, and this is an important question as well, because it's the competition. Everybody knows what everybody else was doing in Florence that drives the Renaissance.
Reina asks, is it possible that his model for Mary in the Florence painting was a farm girl with muscles from physical work?
Oh, you mean the one in the Pietà in Rome, I think is quite delicate, but I think that the model for the beautiful seated Mary in the painting, to me, that model is for sure a man. And we're sure of that because of some drawings that Michelangelo did of a man in that position, and he translates the male figure into the image of the Virgin Mary. But certainly those Tuscan farm women would have been pretty muscular, it's true.
So can you talk a little bit about the marble that was used? Susan wants to know if it was Carrara marble.
Right. Susan, I'll be talking more about Carrara and the marble there on the next presentation. We'll actually go together visually into Carrara, but I'll preempt that by saying it's in Carrara, which is up in the Apuan Mountains. If you went to Pisa in the north, in an area called Versilia, that's where Carrara is. And there are many different quarries. Michelangelo spent years up in the quarries choosing perfect marble. It's the condition of Carrara, basically marble is billions and billions of years of shells compressed. And the quality of Carrara marble is that there are very few veins and very few grains. And that's why it's perfect material for marble carving. When it's rather soft in terms of a stone. And Michelangelo prized it beautifully because of the color and the ease that he was able to carve it with. Good question.
And then Linda asks, what process was used by him to polish the statues to smooth their finish?
Okay. So when you start carving marble, you use chisels, pointed chisel, flat edge chisel. Then you move on to finer and finer gradations of files, then into sandpaper, pumice stone, And then finally, to make that shine, you take hay and you beat the thing with hay, like shining your shoes. Think of it like that, soft. And what that does, the friction brings up the crystals to the very edge of the marble, expands them, and that's what gives it that gorgeous luminosity. The heat and the crystals and it's really fascinating, and it makes it shiny and impervious to liquid or water.
Do people use it
Moisture.
today? Do people use
Yeah,
that
sure.
technique?
I was in Carrara just last year with a group from the Minneapolis Museum of Art, and I asked one of the marble guys there. There are always these old marble guys. How many years are left of the quarries? And he said there's 1,000 years of marble in these mountains. So there's plenty of marble left for your kitchen counters. Don't worry.
Okay. So we have a few questions about the assistants. Angela asks, did Michelangelo have assistants? And if so, how many? And to what extent did his assistants help with his works?
Yeah.
Maybe give David as an example.
Yeah, for sure. So I know if you read Irving Stone, The Agony and the Ecstasy, always says that Michelangelo did everything alone. That's impossible. We know a lot about Michelangelo's assistants through Vasari and his biographers. So, and Michelangelo gave them kind of funny nicknames. You know, Florentines are kind of famous for making fun of people, like, you know, the devilish character or big nose or, you know, like that, worthy character. So we even know their names, and we know how much Michelangelo paid them through contracts. So certainly when it came to the David, he's going to have assistance for that final polishing of the marble. Then he's got to have assistance for getting that thing up and then moving it across town to place it in front of town hall, which we actually know quite a bit about, the apparatus that had to be built. He moved it, he and assistants using soaped logs that they would push the platform,
No.
remove the log, put it in front. Push the platform, remove the log, put it in front. So yes, absolutely, he's got assistants. No one that really stands out as a great artist.
Aside from his sculpting apprenticeship, Ruth wants to know, what education did Michelangelo have?
Oh no, he has a very good education. He could speak and read Latin as well. And Ruth, the education came when he was invited to live with the Medici family. I mean, what better education than that? Remember, he's a teenager there, 16, 17 years old, and he would have been privy to the lessons that the future Pope Clement VII and Leo X are getting. He could have heard the lessons of Poliziano, Marsilio Ficino. So very well trained, not only with his hands, but also with his mind.
Thank you. Just a few more questions. We have a question from Frances, and she asks, can you speak more about the, I'm not pronouncing this right, but the Doni Tondo frame? What do the figures and heads signify? And could you pronounce whatever I said correctly?
Right. No, it was beautiful, Matt. That was great.
Okay.
The Doni Tondo. Doni comes from the word Doni, which is the last name of those two figures I showed you. The frame we know was carved by an artist named Nighetti. So he was the frame carver. And then within that frame, you saw how very rich it was. It had 4 heads, which are the 4 evangelists. On the top head is Jesus Christ. And then if you get right into the decoration of the frame, you'll actually see 3 crescent moons, which represent the Strozzi family. Because the woman that I showed you in that picture was from the Strozzi family, Magdalena Strozzi. So there's a lot to say about that frame because of the symbolism of the 4 evangelists, the Christ, and then the idea of the marriage. Let me just say that also, if I'd had more time, I could have gone much more into depth with it. But the fact that it's round is important as well, because there's a tradition in Florence that when a woman is pregnant, especially from a high-class family like the Doni, the husband will commission a work of art for her, a round painting as a commemoration. came from a tradition of giving a woman a plate after she gave birth called a desco del parto. And the plate was something that would have been decorated, and you bring her some food, like milk and cookies or something, after she gave birth to give her a little bit of sustenance. And over the decades, it changes and transforms into the shape of a painting, which I think is really interesting.
Wow. So Lori asks, she says she's on the edge of her seat, so she's very much looking forward to part 2, but she asks, was homosexuality accepted back then?
Yeah, good question, Lori. No, it was illegal, and we know a lot about homosexuality in Renaissance Florence. A very good friend of mine, Michael Roque, wrote a book about, I guess it must already be 20 years ago, called Homosexuality in Renaissance Florence, where he went through case after case after case, and there were hundreds of cases. It was so common to be homosexual in Florence that the slang word for being sodomized was to be Florentine. However, illegal officers of the night could be brought up on charges. Leonardo da Vinci was brought up twice on charges of sodomy, but it was something that was quite common. And I think a lot of the Florentines thought of it as sort of like the Greeks. Usually, well, my friend Michael Roque said that 99% of it were older men with younger boys. And then once the boys came of age, things changed. So very common, illegal.
Okay, and just a couple more questions, and then
Sure.
we'll let you go. Were any of Michelangelo's siblings artists?
Were any of Michelangelo's siblings artists? No. Michelangelo was very close to his nephew, named, I can't remember if the nephew, which brother the nephew came from, but he was very, very close to his nephew Leonardo, and ends up leaving most of his property. Michelangelo invested heavily in real estate, and he was very wealthy when he died. And he gave most of that to Leonardo, who kept the Buonarroti family line going. But none of them were ever. Wait, maybe Leonardo's son, Michelangelo the Younger, was not a very good artist. Yeah, Michelangelo the Younger. But unfortunately, that talent didn't pass on.
I know. So the last question is from Adele. Did Michelangelo leave behind sketchbooks or preliminary studies that would show his creative process as he developed his works?
Yeah, excellent. Good question. Wonderful drawings, Adele. Beautiful. That we are fortunate to have at the Uffizi, of course, in the Vatican Museum. The Casa Buonarroti has wonderful drawings, not so much sketch books like Leonardo or Bellini, but sketches. Also, the Queen has quite a few of the drawings. And I've been so fortunate in my life to see these drawings up close and in person, and to see how Michelangelo uses the cross-hatchings and the highlights and lowlights is just something to be seen. So absolutely. Remember, when it comes to Central Italian artists like Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael, it's all about drawing first. It's called disegno, which is the design first, and then you add the color. Whereas, if I ever come back and do a talk on Venice, it's the opposite. First comes color, and then comes design. But for Michelangelo, it's all about design, which is born from drawing.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. So thank you so much, and thank you to the nearly 1,000 people that tuned in today. I hope we got to as many questions as we could. Part 2 is on August 19th, so make sure you register for that. And Elaine, again, so you have started your own online courses, and people can find out more about that at elaineruffolo.com, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And again, if you've enjoyed your lecture today, please consider making a donation to Not-for-Profit Rhodes Scholar so that we can continue providing educational experiences like the ones today. So thank you very much. And Elaine, we'll see you next week.
Arrivederci, everyone. Grazie. Ciao, ciao, ciao.